Hi, I'm Joyce CREIGER. I'd like to welcome my guest today, a gentleman that I have had an opportunity to work with, that I've had an opportunity to know, who is an artist, a photographer, an entrepreneur, and a businessman, and has been making a living doing what he loves for the past 4 decades. I'd like to welcome Steve Edson. Steve, good to see you.
Joyce, good to be with you.
Tell me a little bit about how you got started in this business and maybe a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? And how did you get into this world?
You know, if I look back on how I got into the business of image making, I've got to look at what influences were around me growing up in the New York area. I grew up in Manhattan and then just north of Manhattan in a small suburb of Manhattan called New Rochelle, New York.
I know it well.
And you growing up in the late 50s and 60s, which I was, our world was very influenced by three major medias. One was magazines, one was TV, and one was radio. So when National Geographic would come to the door, or Life magazine, the world opened up into where these photographers had gone. And you combine that with the early parts of TV. Radio was really never a great interest of mine, but the influence of TV and magazines was very influential in my life.
It sounds like the travel part of it intrigued you as well.
Well, looking back, you look at travel. These photographers were paid to go to different parts of the world, and they would bring those pictures back. And then there were stories on individuals, celebrities, but great pictures. And they changed the way I saw the world and influenced me greatly to this day.
So when did you get your first camera?
My first camera came to me when I was 9 years old, in a very interesting story that I'm gonna...
I love your stories. Go ahead.
Well, it was during the summer of, that would have made it 1962, and I was at a day camp during the day in the summers, and somehow, without dragging the story on too long, I was hit in the eye with a pebble and blinded, subsequently relatively blinded in that process.
Wow, I didn't know that.
But one of my neighbors who lived across the street from us was an eye surgeon in Manhattan. And when I came home from the hospital, nursing my eye, I was given a camera.
By
This eye doctor who lived across the street from me.
Oh.
So the first camera was from my neighbor.
And?
So I lost vision, but I gained a whole nother way, or a way to access the world that I never had previously. This is 40-odd years later. I still have several pictures from that very camera.
Where did you find the courage to live out your life as an artist? We all know that's a tough road to hoe. What made you commit to do that?
I'd have to say in high school, when I spent time in a photography class, and I started spending time in the darkroom, a lot of time by myself in a very formative part of my growing up, which is as a teenager. And I would spend time going outside and photographing my environment, bring it back in, develop film, blow it up, and start looking at it. I began to identify what the world looked like according to Steve Edson.
And at what point did you find subjects that intrigued you enough to stay with it, to do a series perhaps, or to do some sort of a group of images that were cohesive?
Looking back on that, with that question in mind, I'd say starting in about 1972, I started taking the train into New York City and walking areas of New York that kids probably shouldn't have been walking in. And I used to just explore all side streets, corners, nooks and crannies of Manhattan. And I cringe at times looking back on it, but that began the real exploration into a world that I never really knew. Now, I'd spent time in Manhattan growing up as a child, visiting family that lived in New York. But it was fascinating to go in and search it out and begin to identify what New York was about. Who are the people that live there? What are the buildings like?
I'm interested in you telling our viewers a little bit about an image that I fell in love with called The Married Couple. And you told me a little story about that, and I think that would be of interest to our viewers. How you got started making money in the art business.
It was a summer, and I had time off from college, and I needed to figure out, I needed to make money during the summer to pay for anything I was going to be trying to do. And I came up with this idea, which was to go to New York City Hall in Manhattan and photograph newlyweds that were being married in public ceremonies by a justice of the peace. And I would stay outside, and when they came out, I would ask them if they needed or would like a photo to memorialize this day in their life. And for a very small amount of money, I would take a portrait of them, and I'd get their address and a check or a cash, and I'd end up processing the film in my darkroom, make a print, and mail it to them.
Pretty creative. After high school, you decided to apply to college, and you knew that you were going to take some sort of art courses. What was that experience like for you? You went to a small school. Was that helpful in your career ultimately?
Joyce, I couldn't wait to get out of the traditional American education system. It was, for me, it was extremely hampering to my growth, and I could not wait to get to where I applied was Goddard College, a very small liberal arts progressive education system up in Vermont. And it was a godsend for me. It afforded me to be able to move at my own pace, take the courses that I wanted to take, and I really jumped full into the photography realm. And I spent a whole lot of time working with Jeff Weiss up there, who was one of the key instructors up there, who had in turn worked with Mina White over at MIT. So the ability to get fully immersed in something that I wanted to finally do as part of my education process was really priceless for me. From that, I decided that I really wanted to concentrate not just in a liberal arts education. I wanted to focus solely in the fine arts, and I applied to Massachusetts College of Art and Design, currently called, and I was able to concentrate mostly on photography, but I was able to study within the realm of studio for interrelated media. Within that, photography was one piece of it, but also working in sound, working in film, and how these mediums interacted or began to interact with each other. And this is way before the time that we had the ease of combining it and synchronizing all of this through computers.
I think our audience would be interested, since you go back a while, to tell us a little bit about what it was like shooting in black and white, developing your own film, coming into the age of colored photography, and then presto, we're into digital world. What was that like for you, and how did that shape any of your actual production later on?
When I realized that working in a darkroom, which I worked in for days, the understanding the ability to be able to manipulate a print with light was extremely difficult and almost impossible to replicate those movements over and over again as one built out editions of prints. So every print became different, but it was annoying because it could never be exactly what I wanted as an artist. I knew that at a certain point in this process that we would be able to work images instead of on film. And once it was on a screen, you'd have the ability to manipulate and change, similar to a darkroom, but different.
So you're talking about using Photoshop and the various techniques to post-produce your product.
Yes.
Well, I'm thinking more in terms of what was it like to go from a black and white world of photography all of a sudden into using and shooting in color? Did that impact you in any way? Was it more exciting or was it less exciting? Or was it neither?
There were things that I love about black and white, about the starkness, about the simplicity of shape and form. And there is something glorious about color, natural color, color that we find in everyday life. Red of a fire truck, red of an apple, very different types of reds, but equally vibrant colors. So to this day, most of my work is predominantly color, but some of the work that I'm doing is really about the starkness, about black backgrounds and white or red or oranges, part of my road series the painted series.
We talked a little bit about an image that I fell in love with, which was the hanging dead deer. And the starkness of that really talks about what you're referring to. And then you went on to color, and I looked at a portrait of Alan Crite, which was probably one of the single most amazing portraits I've seen. I knew him, and you captured every essence of this man. The tattoo man was the same. I looked at him and I was just, there was something that you captured that was back in, I don't know how long ago, but it could be on the street today. And it just hit me as being a strong, powerful, compelling image. So moving on in your career, you were a commercial photographer many years, and you traveled the world. How did that impact your family? How did that impact your relationships? You were always flying here or flying there on assignment. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Was it something that you did because you had to? You were that, in your career at that point, really not having the luxury of going to shoot what you wanted. You were under assignment. Tell us what that was like.
So for me to go out and try to make a living as a fine art photographer, I'd have to be dead to be able to make it, and that just wasn't in the realm of possibility. But I knew that I wanted to travel, and I knew that I couldn't afford to travel. So I tried to find an occupation within photography that would allow me to travel to my subjects. And it was pretty systematic in how I came through that process and came up that an architectural photographer
had to travel.
Had to travel. They couldn't bring the buildings to you. They'd have to bring you to the buildings. That became my focus for many years. Coming out of college, the United States was in a major building boom in the early 1980s. And we had all these real estate investment trusts really developing the United States and putting a lot of money into the infrastructure, into residential, commercial architecture. And I hooked up with several clients who I started off working for interior designers and architects, doing local stuff in the New England area. And then I started branching off and doing real estate work for Sotheby's Park Bernay, and I'd shoot off to Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, doing very high-end pieces of real estate, all residential at that point.
Did you enjoy that?
Oh, I loved it. It was to get in the car and just travel and be footloose and free and capable of doing what your clients needed you to do, but still have some time for yourself to look at the world around you was priceless.
What was the toughest part of being a commercial photographer?
What was the toughest part then is the toughest part now, which is finding clients. Because there's a pipeline that you need of constant flow of clients funneling through to be able to keep the business going. And that was always the problem early on. It was the problem and challenge of the business. The vision was always there. We always waited to have the opportunity to shoot for clients.
Now, what about today with websites, the internet? Do you have your own website?
I do. I have a couple of websites. One that appeals strictly to my commercial work, and another site that strictly appeals to clients that work in the fine art realm.
Now, has that produced any business for you? Are you able to use that as a marketing tool?
I've used, the internet is an incredible tool. It has a reach like nothing else that has come before us. The ability to show images to whoever comes to visit, and we now are learning how to use all the tools of how to attract certain markets and audiences to come to a website. So it's certainly beneficial in that process. I'm still learning how to use it.
Are you involved with Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Pinterest and all the others?
I know. How many more others are there?
There are a lot.
They keep coming, and they go in favor and out of favor. And there are a lot of issues with this stuff, so I try to stay abreast of it and up to date. But there are also issues with a lot of these portals.
As a fine art photographer, one of the big things and challenges that most artists and photographers have is getting the word out, getting their images out to the public. You've tried various things. What are some of the things that you think might suit you in the future?
I have no doubt that the access to the large public around the world exists on the web, and that there are portals that are being developed and are developed, things like Art Specifier, that is allowing artists to reach communities of people that we've never been able to reach as easily as we are now. To do it with the ability to understand who that market is and be able to speak to them, engage them with work that's relevant to them is an amazing tool that's available to artists today that has never been available in previous decades.
To me, a site that is going to do this for an artist really needs to have somebody who's been in the business and knows the business. Whereas Amazon and Google know the world and they know images, but do they really know how to place the right artist with the right designer or the right curator or the right museum? So I think this is going to narrow down at some point, and the sites will be fewer than they are now. But I think you can't ignore this as a vehicle for artists to get their work out there. Talk to me a little bit about the distinction between commercial photography and your fine art photography. I know you have a number of different series in the fine art photography. You have a statuary portfolio that's quite amazing. You have a portfolio of your road images, which are absolutely crisp and stunning and contemporary and graphic, and I love them. And you have the mannequin series, which is another wonderful series. All of these are your fine art photography. How is that distinct? Make the distinction between the fine art photography, if you will, for our audience, and your commercial photography.
When I go out to photograph for a client, there's a very specific expectation of what they need from what I'm about to do. So by that very nature, it changes how I go about doing what I do. My personal work is a lot about the exploration and the finding, the surprise, of finding the unexpected. Now that happens as well in the commercial world.
Right, because I've seen some of your commercial photography and it's as creative as your fine art photography. I find it hard in some ways to really make that distinction. I think as an artist, you can't separate yourself. That artist in you exists whether you're shooting a bunch of tomatoes or if you're shooting road signs. It doesn't matter. You have a creative eye, and that eye goes with you on every shoot you make.
Absolutely.
So whether somebody hires you or whether you go out because of the love of wanting to go out, the artist stays there. And I don't see the artist leaving.
The artist is at work all the time, but you won't be hanging a picture of a CEO of a major Fortune 500 company in your living room.
Well, that's true, but those tomatoes I might hang in my kitchen.
The tomatoes, yes. Other kind of explorations that I've undertaken, but rarely, and this is where the real distinction happens, is that the work gets used for magazines, it gets used in annual reports or advertising, but rarely does that cross over back to the fine art world. Not true with the fine art world, that fine art images can be repurposed into the commercial and corporate world and used on covers of annual reports and book covers and
or
magazines.
Hang in a hotel, or hang in a boardroom, or hang in a hospital.
Restaurants,
right,
yes.
Exactly. So I know what you're doing now, which is kind of unique in the world of photography. Perhaps you could tell your audience a little bit about visual streams.
Visual streams came about as a need with one of our clients to be able to deliver a whole bunch of video to the Libyan government. And they've been teaching the Libyan elite and business owners Western theories of economics based on Michael Porter's theories. Michael Porter is a major educator at Harvard Business School and has taught theories of modern economics and how it applies to how to really do nation building economically. And it's a model that can be applied to developing nations. Monitor Group had a contract to be in Libya, this is in the Gaddafi years, in helping really move Libya away from an oil-based country into diversifying its ability to make money besides just relying on its only one natural resource. And so at the end of the day, they had all this video from all these workshops they had given, and they needed to put all this video together. So we worked with them in not putting the videos together, but actually creating an entire learning module about breaking down business strategies, business leaderships, entrepreneurialism, and competitiveness. And it brought in my love of video, it brought in photography, it brought in music, it brought in animation, and it really helped tell a story. Very completely, very easily, very easy to remember story about how to move a country forward.
So you now have this company, and you do this for other people as well. Is this something that you're going to continue doing? Are you going to go back to your fine art photography, go back to your mannequin series, try to get that into a gallery, try to get it into a museum? Where does your heart want to go?
Wherever the heart wants to go, the body's got to pay for it.
So this is a constant push-pull in your career.
Yes, as I know most artists are constantly having this battle about how to pay for your materials, how to pay for your exhibitions, and pursuing your vision, but yet having to put food on the table. So Visual Stream will forever, I think, stay as part of my business entity, as services that we provide to our clients, because I really love helping clients tell their stories that differentiate who they are from their competition, and do it in a fun and unique, exciting way while educating their clients.
That telling story is a theme that goes throughout your life, because I know when we spoke about some of the earlier work, even the early black and white work, you were photographing airports with hundreds of people, and you saw a relationship between each of these people that may not have really existed in real life, but you saw a story. Do you still feel that way about your photography?
The narrative has been changing. So the work that I'm doing lately, you touched upon my
The road.
painted lines
Right.
on roads and the religious statuary. It's really those stories in a portfolio of images, of many images. Those stories tell very different stories about places, about our culture. The lines, painted lines, tells a very different story about the inadvertent artistry that goes into the lines we find on roads. Now, the funny thing is, I'm driving here, I'm looking at the roads, and I'm going, oh, I gotta come back, I gotta do those lines, those are great, I've never seen those lines. So we have road crews that are out putting crosswalk lines in, and then the water company comes and they put their lines in, and then cable companies come in. And each person is adding to this collective vision on the roads that nobody pays attention to. Somehow, for some reason, I've become infatuated with it, and wherever I go, I look at the roads for what painted lines are there.
What is Steve Edson going to be 5 years from today? Is he going to be a videographer? Is he going to be a photographer? Is he going to be a commercial photographer? Or are you going to get into what you really love, which is this fine art photography?
In my heart of hearts, I know that I will always be a still photographer traveling the world. Looking around corners, looking around, walking down streets I probably shouldn't be walking down, because I want to know what's around the corner. What does it look like? What does it look like today? What does it look like tomorrow? What does it look like next week or next year? And it's a big world.
So if money was no object,
I'd be on the road photographing in a different country every month.
Jack Kerouac, on the road again.
Yes.
With that, I think unless there's something else you'd like to talk about, we can conclude our interview, and I'd like to see you 5 years from today with that camera on your back going down the road.
Well, thank you, Joyce, and thanks for having me.
My pleasure, Steve.